It was 9 p.m. and the janitor was cleaning the library as he did every day. He made sure all visitors had left. He was sweeping. He heard the sound of books falling to the ground. Then, the sound of a little boy crying followed by the sound of little footsteps running. "Hey, you can't be here. The library's closed," the janitor shouted, walking in that direction. He saw a 6-year-old boy with a red hat standing there looking at him. There were wet and muddy footprints all over the ground. So messy, he thought. Suddenly, his badge unclipped from his waist and fell onto the floor. He picked up his badge and looked up to find the child had disappeared. At the end of his shift, he was about to dump the papers into the bin when something caught his eyes. There was a ripped page from the front of yesterday's newspaper. It read, "Body of missing local boy found in lake." With the boy's picture, chills trickled down his spine. Mary was a blind woman who lived alone. One day, Mary was taking a stroll in the park like she did every day. She sat down on the same bench. Today, someone else came and sat next to her. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Mary asked the stranger. The stranger replied, "Yes, it is." Then the stranger began asking Mary strange questions. "What color do you like? Do you see the children over there? What do you do at night?" Mary started to feel an unsettling feeling, and the stranger noticed it. The stranger asked Mary if she was afraid of him. The fear was growing inside. "Mary, I liked your blue pajamas last night," he said. Horrified, Mary stood up and asked, "Who are you?" There was silence. A woman was nearby and asked if Mary was okay. She told them about the man that was sitting next to her. The woman replied, "I don't understand. There wasn't anyone sitting with you."
Subscribe now.
Emily was a bright 5-year-old girl. She often played in her room alone. Playing tea party and hide and seek were some of her favorite activities. One day, Emily made a new imaginary friend named Adrian. Her parents thought she had a wild imagination. One evening, Emily was crying in her room. Her mother asked her why. Emily said Adrian kept trying to get her to go into the crawl space behind the closet. Emily was afraid of spiders. Her mother played along and said, "Honey, it's all right. You don't have to go." Emily whimpered and pointed to the wooden board that covered the crawl space in her closet. Her mother said, "Emily, I will show you. There is no one there." The mother moved the clothes and opened the crawl space. And there was Emily crying inside the crawl space. Emily whimpered, "Mom, help me," before a creature popped up between the mother and her child. Lee had died and his family was setting up his funeral ceremony. Lee's widow was setting up the tables when she noticed a strange young lady enter the room. The lady sat down in the corner and watched everyone. The widow watched as that young lady stood up and started walking towards the casket. Then the strange lady climbed over Lee's body. She had crawled inside the casket. The widow ran over to stop the strange lady. "What are you doing?" the widow shouted. The strange lady raised her head up and looked at the widow. Blood started trickling down her mouth. The teeth shone like polished daggers, and the smile appeared to expand impossibly broad. The widow screamed in horror and trembled in terror. The rest of the family ran in to see what was going on. The widow fainted onto the floor in complete terror as the strange lady casually walked out of the room, passing by all the other family members.
Subscribe now.
In the 1940s, during a hunting trip, two brothers ventured deep into the jungle. Night was approaching, and they had lost their way. Bickering, they were interrupted by an old lady sitting by the creek. The old lady guided them to a remote village. They were given some food. It tasted funny. The younger brother went to look in the large clay pot. He opened the lid. In the dim light, the head and random body parts of a child emerge. Cam, terrified, ran to warn his younger brother. The two brothers made a dash for the jungle. The old lady noticed they were gone and alarmed the rest of the village. The villagers were shouting with their torches. The chase began. The villagers were catching up. The two brothers slipped down a slope off the path. They huddled together in fear under the plants and foliage. Shouting and lights from torches flickered past them from above. Morning came, and the sight of numerous unmarked shallow graves stood before them. One night, John was working on his YouTube video. When he finished his recording, he played the video back and heard.
The family ran in to see what was going on.
Help me.
The widow fainted onto the floor in complete terror.
This continued to happen for several days. One night, while sleeping, a face suddenly appeared in his dream, startling him awake. He looked and saw a man standing there. John jumped out of bed and turned his light on, but there was no one there. Several days later, John was working on a video about his ghostly encounter. He felt a cold chill in the room. He took off his headphone and was about to get up when he heard a noise from the closet. Startled, he quickly looked around. There was no one else. Although he was spooked, he returned to his recording. He listened, and this is what he heard.
I saw a man
You.
with a 90.
Danger. Run. It's coming. Behind. You. Subscribe now.
It was 9 p.m. when the two USA English camp leaders named Katie and Jenny headed to bed. The little Japanese student campers were tucked in and sleeping away. It was around midnight when Katie, who was on the top bunk, heard someone approach their bunk bed. She opened her eyes and saw her mother. The mother climbed onto the bed and smiled. The mother reached out and held Katie's hand. Katie instantly realized it was not her mother. That woman quickly crawled behind Katie. Katie turned around to find a ghostly Japanese woman wrapping her arm around Katie. Katie screamed, waking up Jenny. Jenny tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't work. The room filled with whispers. Whispers came from under the student's bed and bounced around the room. After a few minutes, it stopped. The lights came back on. Terrified, the two USA camp leaders stayed awake all night with the lights on.
Subscribe now.
It was 4:30 a.m. when Mark drove to his favorite fishing spot. When he arrived, another fisherman was already using the area. He walked down the bank of the lake. He came across a hidden trail. He followed it to a remote open area. It was perfect for fishing. After casting his bait, he waited quietly. Daylight was barely approaching when he felt a nibble on his bait. Excited, he waited for the perfect time to strike the fish. The fish takes the bait, and Mark enters a game of tug-of-war. He saw the fish jump up, followed by something briefly bobbing in the water before sinking. He looked closer. This time, he could clearly see the shape of a woman's head floating down towards him. He panicked and thought he had found a body. Suddenly, the woman's head stood upright, smiled at him eerily. Before submerging underwater, she didn't resurface again. There was no explanation for this.
Subscribe now.
John and his friends rode the city bus past an abandoned house every day. John and Kevin made a bet. Whoever stayed in the building the longest would win a free admission to the state fair. The place was old and dusty. They sat for an hour and quit. They started to climb out the window. John heard a noise from upstairs. He told Kevin to wait while he checked it out. Kevin tried to stop him, but John insisted. Kevin waited for him outside. John walked up the stairs to a small nursery. There was a small wind chime near the broken window. He chuckled and walked back down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, he heard a woman's voice. He looked back and an armless woman was slithering down the stairs. John freaked out and jumped through the window, breaking the remaining boards. The two guys ran away from the abandoned house. John had nightmares for weeks about that thing he saw.
Subscribe now.
In 2007, Sarah received a phone call at 2 in the morning. The caller ID stated, "Payphone."
Hello.
When Sarah answered, there was no answer, just silence. Sarah hung up the phone. This repeated several times.
Hello.
Sarah was getting annoyed.
Oh my
She
god.
called the number back and heard a disconnect message. She hung up and unplugged the phone from the wall. Sarah went back to sleep. Around 5 in the morning, the phone rang again with the same caller ID. This time Sarah picked up the phone and shouted, "Stop calling me." Sarah was about to say more when she heard this.
A mix of sun and cloud. The region.
She stared at the telephone cord laying on the carpet. The phone cord had been disconnected the entire time. A chill came through the room. I was 16 years old when this happened. I was playing flag football outside with the neighbor's kids when another child approached us. He looked to be about 8 years old. That child did not talk and just sat there watching us. I asked if he wanted to join, but he just shook his head no. After the game, I noticed he was still sitting there. I walked over to him and started talking to him. He told me his name was Petey. We talked for a while until my mother came outside and asked who I was talking to. I told her who he was and continued talking to the boy. Her face became horrified, and she told me to go home right away, leaving me confused. I was not allowed to go outside the rest of the day. Later that night, my mother finally told me the story behind Petey. It was a nickname she had given her twin brother who passed away when they were 7 years old. What creeped me out the most was when my mother told me there was no one sitting next to me.
Subscribe now. Subscribe now.